with the new year, new quarter. And so for this first class, we'll do a little bit of summary about what we're going to be talking about this quarter, and then get into the first lesson. But first, we'll start with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for these opportunities that we have to gather together with our brothers and sisters to study your word. We're thankful for the word that you've preserved for us that we can study. And as we approach overviewing the Old Testament this quarter, we ask you to bless this study and help us to draw things out of it that we can apply to our lives and be better followers of yours and better students of the word that you've left us. We ask you to bless all the other classes going on throughout the building as well, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so as you can see on the screen, Bryce, could you turn on the back monitor as well? Thanks. So we're talking about this quarter an overview of the Old Testament, and we're doing the class slightly different. So we're splitting up teachers between myself, Robert Davis, Will Sawyer, and Josh Huffman. So we're taking turns teaching. We're not going into rotations. You can't plan ahead to be here with a certain teacher. We'll keep you all on your toes on who's going to be teaching. And thanks to Josh Cleveland, he helped us kind of encourage those of us that are teaching, kind of gathered us together, proposed a topic for us, and found some good material for us to base the class off of. So it's by the class materials from Jeremy Hodges, who did a gospel meeting for us. I think that was last year or 2 years ago. So that's where the kind of the basis of the material goes. But thanks again to Josh for helping us get us started. So class goals, like I said, we've talked a little bit about what the overview of the class is going to be. Overview of the Old Testament. It could go in lots of different directions, and you might be wondering how we're going to do that in one quarter. So it is going to be high level. In each quarter, in each class, we'll get to kind of the timeline and how it breaks up. But really have three goals for the class. So to learn more about the Old Testament and why it matters to us as Christians. At the end of the day, that's what matters most to us, right? Is when we're reading the Bible, how does that actually apply to us? And there's definitely stories in the Old Testament, and there's times in the Old Testament that maybe that can be hard to know. Why is this here for us, and what can we apply to us? Learn about God's nature through his interactions with his chosen nation. We'll talk a little bit more about God's nature in the class this morning and learning about that. But ultimately, the Old Testament sets that framework of how God in the past and through the years has dealt with his interactions with his chosen nation. So Israel in the Old Testament as his chosen nation, and there's time before Israel. So how do we track God's nature through that? And then also briefly review the main topics of the Old Testament. So trying to make applications, but then also just either a refresher or becoming more familiar about how the Old Testament lays out, when do things fall within the timeline. And so ultimately we'll hit on that as a goal as well. So getting into the class this morning, I had emailed out on Friday night a couple of questions, a couple of things to get started thinking about. So not sure if people were able to think about this at all, but the title of this lesson is, What is the Bible About? So for those of us that have been maybe going to church, being Bible students our whole lives, maybe this isn't a question you've even thought about, that you've not thought to kind of summarize in a short way. So one of the things I included in the email was try to summarize what the Bible is about in only one sentence, which can be hard, right? Especially if you know a lot about the Bible. What's important to put in that summary about what the Bible is about. And so it's important, though, for lots of reasons. So what could be some reasons of why we would want to know what the Bible is about in a short way? Dan?
It is God wanting to be known by us, to be chosen by us, and loved by us, and to see his love for us, to know him.
Yep. That has several of the things that I have in my couple of definitions shot at this. So it's important. Were you going to tell your what your definition is or why it's important?
God saves his people from their sins.
Okay. Yeah, so it's important to know, to kind of have a short summary, because that comes up, right? That people, I think most people are familiar with the Bible that we interact with, know that it exists, but some people don't know what it's about, or maybe they have ideas like some of these that, yeah, I know the Bible, it's a collection of the old stories, maybe they're kind of like fables, they're just meant to help people be nicer to each other. It's like, kind of like Rabbit in the Hare, where like, it's just a kind of a fun story that teaches us a lesson about how we're not supposed to be proud and be nice to each other, and some life strategy maybe, or maybe it's just a story about an ancient god. It doesn't really apply to us today. It's a bunch of old stories, and it doesn't really make sense how we could apply this to our current lives, because it's talking about things like animal sacrifices and things that we just don't really do today. So these could be ideas that we run into, and I think it's important to have some sort of a short summary to say, well, no, it's actually about this, and without having to go into a 6-paragraph explanation about what's in the Bible, of just kind of a quick hitter. Yeah. So, so the couple of, so I put two ideas up here that kind of touch on the other things that those have been said. And the first one is really based off a lot about how Jeremy described it in the material. So a love story about an all-powerful creator, God, and his relationship with his creation over thousands of years. So that fits in with multiple of the different things, emphasizing on kind of the love that God had for his creation. The other one that I put up is a story about God, the creator, that demonstrates his nature, his expectations, and his love to humans who are the created. So it touches on a little bit about what Dan talked about in his. The thing that I like about this one, talking about God as the creator and then us as humans, the created, that hasn't changed since the creation of the world. That God has always been the creator and humans have always been the created, whether that was Adam or that was us. Throughout all that time, we have that same relationship with God, and so throughout that time, God has had the same nature. He's communicated expectations. He's loved us the same. So to maybe the point of that second worldly summary of how does it apply? Well, we're in the same relationship with God as those that we talk about and study in the Bible. Does anybody else have any other? Ann?
Rather than a story, I see it as a revelation of God about his will for his children and why.
Yep. Good. Kendra, did you have your hand up?
I'm just going to add, I feel like people that don't know the scriptures at all, to hear that it does explain our purpose and what we're here for. We're created for a purpose, God's purpose, to glorify him. And I think that's important to let somebody know that it doesn't know anything about it.
Yep. Any other ideas anybody wants to share?
Generally, the way I look at it, just a real short one is, and it covers his love, it covers everything else, is the God's plan of redemption for mankind, and all that entails his love, what he's done for people, and all that. But everything ties into Christ, because it's through him that redemption came.
Yep.
And so that all the books, all the stories tie in some way or another to the coming of Christ in the Old Testament. And then in the New Testament, pretty much look back to his appearance.
Yep. And so that is a good a little bit of a good transition to the next question. So we've talked about what the Bible is about. So that's kind of a high-level summary about what's the book about, but that could be different from the purpose or the goal. And sometimes I think we can kind of blend those together, especially if we're trying to explain it to somebody. If somebody says, hey, what's the Bible about? And then we could go down the track of, well, starting to go into some of the purpose of it or the goals. So just as we would kind of split those up in a couple of different categories for other books, right? If it's a fiction book, it may be about one thing, and the goal is just to be entertaining. It's just a fun book to read. Or if it's a nonfiction book, it may be that it has a specific purpose. So it may be, it may be about U.S. history, but the purpose is to talk about, the Civil War or something like that. So drilling down into the purpose of it. So this is the other question that I sent out. So what do we think for the purpose or the goal of the Bible? Robert?
Kind of touching base on what David was talking about, and God knowing His plan for us from the beginning, because when we were in the garden, everything was there for us. We didn't have to worry about a thing. And so when man failed and He put us outside the garden, then He told us you would have to work by the sweat of your brow for everything that you got. But right then, when He could have destroyed man because he was disobedient, there was still some hope, because at that time He gave us the ability or gave us some hope to work towards something that was still more perfect and far off. In other words, looking for another promised land that He talked about with Abraham. And then, and even beyond that, waiting for Christ, which was to come. And then the heavenly kingdom, which would put us back into the kingdom of God. And this journey that we would travel. And so it would be a long expanse of a journey that we would travel to get back to Him. And He knew that from the very beginning.
Yep. And so did he communicate how to do that?
Yes, He did.
Yep.
Many times.
That's definitely one of the purposes is and I have this in the points I'll bring up in a couple of different ways of communicating His will. Josh?
Yeah, I was going to say, the purpose is to communicate His will with the goal of the salvation.
Yep.
I like the way Paul sums it up in Acts chapter 17. He depended in front of the area of Apocalypse, and he says, we created the world and everything in it, just so perhaps they would reach for Him and find Him.
Yeah.
And that sounds very simple and very base, but that was his goal, so it would find Him. He wasn't trying to hide from us.
Yep. That's right. Yeah, so that's a lot of what's been said is the points I have up. So for God to clearly communicate His will to humans, like I said, that goes for at Bible times, all the way through Bible times, and then to us as well, that God is still clearly communicating what His will is to us. The Bible demonstrates that God's eternal will is the best way to live. So we have, somewhat to Robert's point about God communicated, God's a judge, right? And so He ultimately is going to judge all of us. So would it be fair for us to be judged without knowing what those expectations are? No. So He's going to demonstrate those things to us. He gives us lots of examples of how to live, and ultimately, one of the other, or why ultimately this other also matters, is that we have free will to choose to follow His will or not, right? And so we have examples, real life examples, the real people that lived on the same earth as us, that had to live through consequences of human choices that they made. That they have free will just like us. They have the option to choose to follow God's will, and if they don't, there's lots of examples in the Bible of what are the consequences of those decisions. And it seems like there's a lot of those, right? That as we're reading through, it's, that person made a misstep here, or made a bad choice, or, we may say, as we're going through the Old Testament, as we're doing this study of, why do they keep doing that over and over again? But I'm grateful I'm not in the Bible or living during that time, because I'd be right in there too. And I think most of us would probably, if we're honest with ourselves, we would be just like those real humans that we read about that are making the same mistakes, or making bad choices, or having to live with consequences of decisions that we made. But I think that makes it more relatable, right? That we're not reading about people that are lived on a different planet. They lived at a different time, but they're not humans like us, or they're different creatures. These are humans that dealt with the same earth that we live on, and they had lives just like us. They dealt with things, human things as well, which makes it ultimately more relatable to us. Yep.
I was just going to say, the stories are about Abraham and Moses and all those guys, but they're ultimately about God and who He is. And I always think about, Hebrews when it lists all those people, the Hall of Fame of faith.
Yep.
Those are all stories about those people, but they're ultimately about God.
Yep.
Our own life, we think it's about us, but it's actually about what God is doing, because what He does is the only thing that's going to last.
Yep.
Everything else is going to be gone away.
Yep. Good point. Dan?
A lot of people will make wrong conclusions about stories in the Old Testament, and they'll say that the Bible and God says this is okay, that this is okay because it was there. Much of the Old Testament, dealing with Abraham and a lot of others, it was saying what they did. It's not saying such and such, taking a certain stance on the kinds of marriages that were there. It's recording what happened and how that worked out.
Yep. Yeah, and those are the real life consequences, right? We see people's lives get overly complicated, which we can see in our lives today, right? We can see coworkers' lives, maybe our own life of, we can see that we've made our lives more complicated than it needed to be had we just followed God's will. And then the last one I have is success in this life is only found in following God's will, which really summarizes into the path towards salvation. That success in this life is, at the end of it, being united back with God. And the purpose of the Bible is to show us how to get there, how to have success in our lives, and ultimately be in that right relationship with God. And ultimately, that gets into the way that happens is through Jesus, that we need His help. But ultimately, all that's found in the Bible. That like David said, you could trace that through, which builds our faith, builds our confidence in God, that He loved us in such a way that He had that plan. But we can see that path all the way through in His will. Somebody else have a hand? David?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was thinking about 2 Timothy 3:16,
Yep.
and looking at the value of Scripture, and it uses the word that it's profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, and training in righteousness. So there's a change that's going on there with the end result of the man of God making complete, equipped for every good work. So it reminds us that we're incomplete, and if we're going to be men and women of God, Scripture is where we get the training and correction and so forth.
Yep. That's where I have my Bible open to. So you stole my last point. So yeah, that's what I was going to summarize with. And I think all those things that we see in there are the things that we have in there. That we have those real life examples that maybe we can take value in reproof that we read through in the Bible against one of the other humans that we read about, or get correction from those that ultimately we can apply to our lives. So, that's definitely a good summary of the purpose of how we use the Scriptures. So, anybody else have anything to share on the purpose or goals of the Bible?
Just one last thing.
Yep. Well, and I think that maybe I keep going back to the real life components of it, but a lot of what we're taught in the Bible, it's not teaching about what we're supposed to do here, right? It's not books and books about how we're supposed to go through being a church and the things that we're supposed to do. That for us in the New Covenant, the majority of what it tells us is what we're supposed to be doing when we're not here, right? In our real lives. That's what it's there for, and it's not just a church book or a book about church as like the world might classify it. It's how we're supposed to live our real lives. All right, so little exercise here to go a little bit more into what we get out of the Bible as we study it. So I'm going to put up two pictures up here, and want some feedback about what you all see when you look at these. San Antonio. Yeah. Okay. What else comes to mind when you see these pictures? What? A path? Okay. Okay, yeah. What about if you're in your car and you see this? Okay. Everybody's so positive. So this is how you guys, you're on your way to work, you see a road closed, you're like, man, there's something new coming. Like, this is awesome. Like, let me go 6 miles out of my way. Like, man, I'm sure glad that they're doing that back there. Is that what everybody thinks? Or do we think, long detour, like, everywhere I go in San Antonio, it's like the roads are closed. How am I supposed to get around? Like, how is it possible that another road is closed? Or wasn't this one just closed? Didn't they just do this? I feel like this was already done, maybe. Or how much longer is this going to be closed? Or maybe in this the bottom right, you see all the equipment lined up. Does anybody ever think, man, every time I drive by here, nobody's actually working, right? So for those of you that don't know, I'm a civil engineer that does projects like this for a living. So what I see is different than what you all see, as we call you all the general public. So, but what I see is that you see here this sidewalk closed. Maybe this is a sidewalk project that is putting a sidewalk connecting a neighborhood to a school so kids have a safe way to walk to school. Or you see here that they have half the road dug up. Maybe they're replacing a water line that's a lead pipe so we can supply safe drinking water to those houses that are along the way. Or maybe this bottom right picture, you can see how the road slopes up, so maybe they're building a bridge that goes over a railroad. Maybe that railroad has, like we see a lot in our area, maybe it's a common place for trains to just stop and sit for a while, which can split off from emergency services. That if they're headed to a call and they hit a train that stopped, what do they have to do? Turn around. So, maybe there's a great benefit people don't see in that. And then also the sequence of work, that knowing how to build these things. When I see things, I see, like this is where they're at in the project. This is how much longer they have to go. Or maybe they have to wait and let things let the concrete cure. So that's why they're not working today, is because they poured concrete yesterday. They can't get on it for a few days. And so when I see those things, I have a different perspective than everybody else, because while I do get annoyed with sometimes whenever roads are closed or things are done like how I would do it, I can also appreciate different times of closures run long, or sometimes there's not a great detour, those types of things. But ultimately, it changes my perception. So when I when I come up on a construction project, my perception of that is different, because that's I have one of the things listed on here is education and experience. And those are different things that I have a particular education in. And so I view those differently, as opposed to those that don't have that. You're going to view it in a different way. And so ultimately, the things that we see in reality there on the right is all filtered through that lens or that perception that we have. And so it lists here a few different things. So our perception can be based off of our family or our friends, different experiences that we have, the culture that we're raised in, or the culture that's around us, our education, like I mentioned. So just as all of you, if I came across something that's in your professional life that I don't fully understand, so I have kind of a warped reality of what's going on, you would have that different perception. And so we can appreciate that amongst ourselves, and that's where we get a lot of differences in how people in our world today, that we have a different perception of reality. That's where a lot of conflict comes up in our lives with the world, is that we could be looking at two exactly the same situations as our coworker, and be seeing reality in two completely different ways. We see this with our kids, right? That oftentimes our kids have a totally different view of reality than what we do as the parents. Well, that's probably because we've lived longer, we have more experience, we know more about how things work, and those types of things. And so then there at the bottom, it kind of works back towards the left of, we view reality, and then it kind of works back through to how we feel about those things. So our perception is really how we interpret reality, which then produces our thoughts about it, and then ultimately our feelings. So, go ahead.
That's when I'm on my way on doctor's appointments. If it's Carol Fellinger, Beverly Mitchell, my comment is, at my age, I won't see this project completed. That's what I say to them every time we take off.
Yep.
I will not see this project complete.
Yep. And would you be happy to hear that the project is ahead of schedule? Probably not, right? Doesn't matter. All right, so, yeah, Brandon.
What I was going to say is that I see boundaries.
Yeah?
Boundaries can also change, have different variables included, so it could be a good thing or a bad thing, whichever side you're on.
Yep. Robert?
I was just gonna say in your story, you're talking about humility, because everybody sees something different. And last time we were reading about Abram and Lot. And they saw something different on Lot did. But they had so much stuff between them that they didn't have enough land, so they had to separate themselves. And so Abram, in order to not have strife, he said, you go to the right, I'll go left. You go to the left, I'll go to the right. So he was humbling himself and said, whatever you choose. And Lot chose the one place that he could see all the water and everything. And Abram went the other. But what he did was he trusted not in his own understanding, but he thought about the Lord. He trusted in the Lord. And his decision that he made, wherever he would be or wherever he would go, God would take care of him. And that's what we as Christians
Yep.
depend on. We depend on that.
Yep. So did Lot do that, though? Or what was Lot's decision based off of? That was based on his experience and his education of, I'm going to go where the greener grass is, because that's where I know where I'm going to be more successful. I'm going to have all these herds. I need green grass. And Abram, like he said, I don't care which direction you pick. I'm confident that it's going to work out either way. I don't need to even look at the grass. I can know it doesn't matter to me. So yeah, good point. Okay, so tying it back to the Bible. So just as we went through that exercise, and for things like road work, that I'm able to hopefully share some knowledge to change your perception of those pictures that we showed. Ultimately, God does the same thing. So going back to what we talked about in the purpose and the goals of the Bible, is ultimately things that God is teaching us about reality that's going to change our perception of that. And so added into the graphic, we get out of the Bible, we get commands and we get examples. So we talked about that, of God expressing his will to us in commands about things that he wants us to be doing, and then examples of those things. And so then we can now add that to our perception lens. So yeah, we're still going to see reality based on the culture that we're in, or our education or our experience. But we also can add to that lens of how we use reality, of the things that we gain from the Bible, those commands and examples. And ultimately, why does that matter? Who created reality? God. And so he gives us the tools that we need to see reality as he intended us to see it. That a lot of times and there's even there's stories in the Bible, even like Dan was saying, that people, if you just pick up the story and read it, you would have, like, what's the point of this? Like, what? This doesn't make sense. Like, what's going on here? But if you read the whole Bible and you get a context of who God is, what he's trying to teach us, what his nature is, then you can actually see the reality as he intended it, and it makes it more applicable to us, and it makes more sense. So as we study these things, then that's how we can better understand the reality that God, the Creator, actually created. Robbie?
I was going to say the way that we act too also can change people's perception of the Bible, because we might be the only Bible
Yep.
that people read. A lot of people in the world will say, oh, Christians are this and Christians are that, and it's the perception that they have of somebody else who calls themselves a Christian.
Yep.
And so it actually, brings the wrong name or bad attitude to Christians in general. So, the way that we act and the way that we present ourselves is a huge key, I think, in that component.
Yep.
A lot of people don't read the Bible.
Yep, that's a good point. And then also some people just assume that they know what the Bible says, and now they're applying that without having actually read it, or like you said, bad examples and things like that can really turn people off to the Bible, and because now they're seeing a warped reality. And well, when I look through that lens, I don't like how reality looks, but they don't actually have a good idea of what's in the Bible, and so their lens is warped. Is there anything else on Robert?
So one thing I think is interesting about this picture is, I think, something that we all struggle with within society. Because if you took reality, let's say you took the earth out and you moved the Bible to that, is I think sometimes when people are looking at the Bible, they're looking through a lens that is affected by friends, family, experience, culture, education. And that's how you have two people that read the same verse that get to different conclusions.
Yep.
And so that goes back to making sure that when we read the Bible, we're looking at things like context. And we're really seeking out the Creator's purpose and not our purpose. Because there are things throughout history that people have used the Bible for that are incorrect.
Yep.
And so I think that's something that's important to understand too when it comes to this perception concept.
Yep. Agreed. So we need to make sure as we're studying that we're trying to keep that out and just get our perception lens shaped as God intended. So I put this in here, really hard to read, or probably impossible to read. Overview of the Old Testament. Basically, we're going to cover the class in 10 lessons, but we're running short on time, so I won't really say any more about that, but going all the way from creation all the way through to the restoration. So we're going to cover it in 10 classes throughout the quarter. So we'll be doing another kind of intro type class in a couple weeks as well, and then we'll wrap it up at the end. But wanted to put this in here to lead into the next topic that we'll touch on quick towards the end of class here. So understanding in that timeline, there's kind kind of three distinct dispensations of how we got the different parts of the Bible. And so as we're traveling through these classes, keeping these in mind, so as we're going through the timeline, and the way that basically this is saying is how God communicated those things that we talked about in the goals. So his will, his expectations, that changed over time as we go through the Bible. And so knowing what dispensation we're in as we're reviewing or as we're studying allows us to make sure we have the right lens, that correct perception, that perspective of how is God sharing the information at the time. So that we have the patriarchal dispensation first. So that's when God spoke directly to heads of households through oral command. So this would be the time starting at Adam, going all the way through to Moses. So we've talked about some of these examples already. Adam. So Adam was told directly by God, don't eat the fruit of the tree, right? That's how that command was given. He didn't read it in a book that had been handed down. Noah was told how to build the ark, and that he needed to build the ark directly by God. Abraham, we've talked about a few times, familiar with all the commands he was given. And then Moses, at the start of Moses' life, he would have been in this period of time that he was directly told by God, go lead the people of Israel out of Egypt. And so God spoke to key individuals. He didn't speak to everybody based on the indications that we have from the Bible. He spoke to those specific people. So then we go in Moses' life, goes to Mosaic dispensation. And so this is when God, through the nation of Israel, he communicated, or mostly through Moses, he communicated to the nation of Israel what his expectations were. So what the laws were, what his expectations were for the nation of Israel. We still have those today. So when you open up Leviticus or Deuteronomy, we have direct commands, right, that are recorded in writing, such as the Ten Commandments, or we have sacrifices. How are the people supposed to do sacrifices to be pleasing to God? We can review those things, but then also this covers all the way up to Jesus' time. So all of those years after Moses, there was a written record of what God's expectations were for the people of Israel. So if you're living just before the fall of Jerusalem, you had a source. You could go back and see, how am I supposed to offer these sacrifices? You didn't have to wait for God to communicate it to you directly. So that was a written down expectation that God passed on. There's also references to look forward. So David mentioned in the Old Testament, it looks back a lot. So this is where we get a lot of the references like clean and unclean, that then ultimately come back in the Old Testament as being, oh, this was a sign, or this was an example of something for the new covenant as well. And then the prophets, how do they fit in? They fit in by reminding the people of what was written, and reminding what happens if you follow God's will and his expectations, and what happens if you don't. That's really the goal of the prophets, was to turn people back to what was written down, pointing people to God's expectations that he had already communicated, and if you don't, this is what's going to happen. And so that's how the prophets fit in. And then finally, where we are today in the Christian dispensation, dispensed by God to everyone by Jesus' teaching and his life. So again, we have our Bibles today. It's also written down for us to refer back to, but we even see Jesus pointing back to it. So when he's making references to what's the greatest command, or those types of answers, is he coming up with something brand new? No, he's pointing back to the teachings that have already been taught, those expectations that had already been communicated, and he's just re-emphasizing those things. And then also we see, and what we have written in our Bibles is how he actually lived. So he's the example of how do you apply that will and expectation into our lives. And then ultimately, for all of us, we're part of this as well. That do we also have a role in dispensing this information and these teachings today. That's part of what we're called to do, is continue spreading this. And so ran out of time a little bit on this, but this covers, will kind of flow into what we'll teach in a few weeks. So Robert is going to teach next week, and we're had to shuffle a little bit the order. So we'll be teaching about the first section of the Old Testament, creation through the flood, I think, is what he's doing, and we'll go from there. So thanks for everybody's attention this morning.